There was a moment's expectant pause while panels slowly came to life on the front of the console. Lights flashed on and off experimentally and settled down into a businesslike pattern. A soft, low hum came from the communication channel. "Good morning," said Deep Thought at last. Good morning, oh Deep Thought," said Loon Qual nervously. "Do you have, that is, an answer for you?" interrupted Deep Thought majestically. "Yes, I have." The two men shivered with expectancy. Their waiting had not been in vain. "There really is one?" said Faug. "There really is one," confirmed Deep Thought. "For everything? To the great question of life, the universe, and everything?" "Yes." Both of the men had been trained for this moment. Their lives had been a preparation for it. They had been selected at birth as those who would witness the answer. But even so, they found themselves gasping and squirming like excited children. "And you're ready to give it to us?" urged Loon Qual. "I am." "Now?" "Now," said Deep Thought. They both licked their dry lips. "Though I don't think," added Deep Thought, "that you're going to like it." "Doesn't matter," said Faug. "We must know it. Now." "Now?" inquired Deep Thought. "Yes, now." "All right," said the computer. Then it settled into silence again. The two men fidgeted. Their tension was unbearable. "You're really not going to like it," observed Deep Thought. "Tell us." "All right," said Deep Thought. "The answer to the great question." "Yes?" "Of life, the universe, and everything," said Deep Thought. "Yes, is," said Deep Thought, and paused. "Yes, is, yes." 42, said Deep Thought, with infinite majesty and calm. That happens to be the number of this episode. Welcome to the Forest Creek Podcast. I'm Raph.
I'm Jarrod.
We're here in Castle Reagan again.
In the flesh.
Last night we recorded the Scotchcast podcast here.
Hence the scotch.
We had a good time. But today we have a bit of a different episode in mind.
Today we have a bad time.
Hopefully not. I hope that none of the times listening to this podcast is a bad time. And if it is, I hope it at least makes you feel better for listening to it. That you can just compare that podcast to the state of your life and be like, I'm doing better. Most of the times I want you to sit in envy and seethe and be like, I wish I had a cardioid microphone.
Who doesn't wish they had a cardioid microphone?
Because then you could tell us about the answer to the meaning of life, the universe, and everything, which is what we're here to talk about.
It's what we're here to learn.
What we're here to consider.
To deeply think about.
As it's put in the book, even, this answer, this question, not understanding it, leads to a lot of the fundamental problems in human psychology, which descend from fundamental problems in human philosophy. And it's interesting, if I were to break it down, the meaning of life, the universe, and everything, and saying it's 42, what that's giving us is a big answer, right? It's the big value. From that, we then break down an epistemology. Epistemology is the system of values, because that's going to help you decide what to eliminate, what to keep, what to nurture, what to put time towards, etc., etc. And that is essentially what is important for life. It's figuring out what's important to you, what serves your mission, and all that. So this kind of points towards one of the first distinctions I want to make, which is that the meaning, the big meaning, is a little bit different than the meaning of your life. And that varies from person to person as well. I've been talking for quite a while.
Yeah, you're. I'm wondering when the monologue will end.
I keep waiting for you to jump in.
Oh.
I'm gonna sit back and let you talk now.
Welcome to my half of the podcast, where I talk about things that are meaningful, like life. So let's go on. What were you saying? Not the big answer to life, but individual purposes. Because you have this term, Ikigai, that translates to reason for living.
Yeah. So that does tie into the ideas like there's the meaning of life, the universe, and everything, the big one. Then what is the meaning for your life? that would translate a little bit into your reason for living. And the word for that in Japanese is Ikigai.
So I guess here's the question that came to mind.
Okay.
You.
Me.
How have you found the closest thing to meaning in your life?
So, a few days ago, my sister is doing her own. She's practicing to become a counselor. She's studying to do that, and she pulled me aside to do like practice for one of her things. And she was basically doing career counseling. And I told her the story of, here's what I kind of noticed I was good at when I was young. Here was my path that I thought I was going to do when I came out of high school. Here are my experiences in post-secondary. And ultimately throughout that, the thing that I found was a common denominator was a love of storytelling. So I really enjoyed telling stories. I liked being engaged in stories. Originally, my first degree was in English literature, and I thought because I had a good English skill, but really what I liked engaging with the most was storytelling. Transmitting stories in some way, whether that was through poetry or through literature or other means. But the things around that were also performative in the storytelling sense. I was interested in being on stage or being on screen and producing things that happened on stage and on screen. And then in post-secondary, the medium kind of changed a little bit, and my fascination became with the audio medium, and now in this, podcasting. So my whole interest is in telling stories. So that's the thing I was good at and the thing I enjoyed the most. So then eventually it kind of started to manifest a little bit that if I tell the stories I enjoy telling the most are the ones that are meaningful in some way. They are symbolic or they contain something that is useful to others. So there's a bit of servitude in that as well, in that like
interesting,
this podcast should be useful to somebody.
Yeah, I like that idea of servitude because we were talking earlier about that guy. What was his name that said pretty much the best thing you can do for yourself and society is to be as generous as possible.
Yeah, that was the thing that Paul Stamets said offhanded. Paul Stamets is a mycologist. He's not really a philosopher, but he said offhanded at one point that he believes that the most important thing that contributes to civilization growth is the generosity of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because also I've heard that it's like helping other people, doing something that's beneficial to others is one of the things that gives the best feeling of reward for people. It's like if it's just fully selfish,
yeah.
Even if you are giving to other people, but it's just fully selfish, it's not as good as the Bible, as it says in the Bible, being a joyous giver, giving for the sake of other people.
I also then pointed out the discrepancy.
Or being happy to do it.
That like, I don't think self-interest is a bad thing.
Yeah.
In fact, it's funny. I was listening to Ron Paul talk about something similar like this. He says he gives to charity all the time, and he says I kind of do it selfishly. It makes me feel good to give to. But yeah, it's being a joyous giver. It's like, does it make you feel good to give? Don't give when it makes you feel bad.
Yeah, because nobody, even if you give things to people charitably or whatever, but you hate it the whole time and you don't hide that, like you're very expressive about how much you hate the fact that you have to give this to somebody, they don't like that.
Well, the point that someone like Ron Paul would be is like, you're doing that when you pay taxes. It's a pretty begrudging. I wonder who he like happily pays their taxes.
The difference being that's not exactly charitable.
Yeah, right. But if you're giving when you're choosing to give voluntarily, that's a different.
Maybe that's how the government should do it. Optional taxes. This is what it's going towards. Feel free to contribute.
I'm on board. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
To have like, they came up to is like, here's all the boxes of the things we're doing. Here's the programs. Decide which ones you want to give money to. The issue, well, we're not going to go down the rabbit hole. But
the issue is that nobody's going to give to it.
Nobody would give to things that they don't care about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I would give to arts and culture and theater stuff to support, like government funded theater exhibitions.
What if instead of taxes, they just did like GoFundMes or Kickstarters?
For everything?
For everything? Yeah. That'd be hilarious.
It would be. It'd also be very time consuming to read like 1 million GoFundMes. Which one of these is for the military? It'd be like, which one of these protects the country?
They have general all year round, all the time like startup fundings that just have like a name and you can read them at any time. They're always there.
I wonder how many people would then be like, there's a war on, give to the war.
It's like military health. Yeah, you'd have a whole bunch of people. It's like taking out of healthcare and schools and putting it into military.
What's interesting, because you hear it in the news in the beginning, it was like, oh, we need to help the people in Ukraine. And then they're like, wait, how much money are we sending over there? Yeah. But to get back to the point, it's like, is giving the meaning of your life.
I think that's one thing that's interesting that we pointed out. It's like, as soon as there's some sort of cause that people actually do see as fully beneficial for everything, they will pull the resources from elsewhere to put into that.
That's a good, interesting
like
point.
They'll sacrifice themselves to a degree to support that thing.
Because it becomes
And wasn't there
meaningful.
was that experiment that I had heard about on probably some other podcast.
Yeah.
Where it was they hired an actor and a volunteer. They hired an actor and they got volunteers. And the actor was behind the screen and the volunteer was told, press this button if they don't answer. Like, ask them these questions, and if they don't answer,
Yeah.
press the button. Yeah, it's like they'd shock them. And then if they were just told to just keep going, when they're like, oh, these, it's like because they thought they were pressing the button and it was shocking the person on the other end, because they thought they were both volunteers.
Yeah, it was a post-World War II experiment to
Yeah.
see, like, could you make a person evil or
Yeah.
make them partake in an evil act? And they would bring their test subjects in and fake a torture scenario
Yeah.
and see how long you could push a normal
Yeah.
person into torturing others. And
But
very few people went, no, I'm not pressing that button anymore.
Well, the interesting result is that very few people said no. Like, they got to the point where they were almost killing the guy from their perspective of, like,
Yeah.
just pumping that dial. But that was only in the scenario when they were told it was for the greater good. It was for the greater good, and the other person signed up for this. But as soon as they were told, just shut up and keep going, everybody refused.
Yeah, you keep pushing them, and
Yeah.
then you get to the point where it's just sadistic. It's like,
Yeah.
make it happen.
So it's like, as soon as there's a greater goal for the greater good of the entire world, people are on board. They find meaning in that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Frankl talks about that a little bit. He also talks about, like,
surprise.
the Nazis in the camps that were running the camps.
Oh, that's interesting.
He pointed out, he said, it's like a lot of these guys were just told to do this. They joined the SS because they thought they were serving their country, and they ended up doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And in some extrapolated way, it's explained to them that, hey, you got to make this person do this thing. But then there were people who were obviously, like maniacs. They wanted power. And then the people who stuck around the camps the longest and worked there the longest were the real sadists, the people who took pleasure in causing other people pain.
Yeah.
Right? But in general, everybody wants to know that they're serving something greater than themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think that gets back to the idea that we don't know what the 42 is, but we get a sense of fulfillment out of believing that we're contributing to something bigger.
Yeah, I think that's one interesting thing about following ideals and stuff like that and finding meaning is that, and being human, is we can't know everything. Going down the whole detail, at some point you just have to trust and do something, and you just have to do something.
There was a quote by St. Augustine that say that, like, you can't fit the ocean in a bucket.
Yes, yeah,
because
that
your
whole
mind is
thing.
that bucket. Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, if I was to bring it back to me, I like storytelling, but just reading comic books all day is a selfish me thing. I was driven.
And it doesn't scratch that itch.
I've been driven to create, and to create requires somebody else to enjoy at least what I'm doing, or to take some enjoyment out of it, or to get something useful out of it. So it's not enough for me to do storytelling for myself. I have to do it in a way that engages with others, because if nobody engages, then I'm like Schrodinger's cat. Let me have the box.
So have you considered or found a time where nobody was engaging? So it's like you have this need and desire and meaning in telling stories and having people engage. Did you ever have a time, or have you considered a time where that engagement was cut off and you lost that meaning? Or did you still have that meaning?
I think if I look on the macro scale, the major way that people are engaging with my whatever I'm doing to do storytelling, it just shifts mediums. Like, I remember at a certain point, we're really heavily invested in playing a tabletop RPG that I'm running, because that is very much storytelling for me. And then suddenly I decide that doing this is more important. This is a different medium for storytelling. I wasn't able to keep going with the other thing, but I'm still doing my storytelling thing by doing this instead. On the other hand, on the micro scale, yeah, there's a lot of those little things. I've written hundreds of thousands of words of fictions that will never see the light of day because they just don't make sense to anybody else. It's like a just for me thing. And there's nothing wrong with having a just for you thing. It's that at the end of the day, if you just did the just for you things, I don't think you would be very happy. I don't think you would find that sense of fulfillment.
Because that's the whole point of hedonism.
Yeah.
Well, that's the whole thing behind hedonism, is just doing everything for yourself. And then you have the picture of Dorian Gray explaining why that doesn't work.
So it's interesting. We got a lot of schools in ancient philosophy in particular that try to figure out what is the meaning of people's lives. How should you live your life? And hedonism is one of these first things because it goes, well, the best experience seems to be pleasure. So maybe the meaning of life is to maximize the way you get pleasure out of life. And I always like to tell the Epicurean kind of story of like he started going, okay, pleasure is a little bit more complex than you think it is because you also got to factor in the morning after. You got to factor in the hangovers. You can't just factor in being drunk, right? So then it starts to change and be a little bit different. So his form of hedonism is different, simpler kind of style where he's like, eat a little bit, drink a little bit, but make sure you're in good company, stuff like that. And then you have other schools of thought that come up, like the Stoics. And the Stoics are like, well, you might have to suffer. You're probably going to have to suffer. If you want to do anything, great.
That's an interesting thing, that it's like, even through hedonism, where the whole idea is pleasure, it's like in your meaning is in as much pleasure as you can get. So what happens when you suffer?
Well, the Stoics believed in the Logos. They believed that there was a universal order that was set into place by the gods.
Is that what Logos is?
Logos has a lot of.
I'm always wishy-washy on the definition. I don't really know it.
It's this particular word is very difficult to define.
Yeah.
But they believed in a capital L Logos that would be like R capital G God. And be like, this is the order of the universe. This is the order of destiny that has been put in motion by the gods. This is the setting of the great Earth computer that's churning out 42. I don't understand where all of it goes, but I can understand that my destiny might not be always to be happy all the time. It might include having to persevere through things that are suffering. One of the most popular Stoic figures, Marcus Aurelius, constantly, despite being the emperor of Rome, seems to constantly be having a hard time.
Yeah.
The poor guy. His son dies or something, and then somebody wants to betray him, and
I read a little comic recently that was so good. It was a classroom of kids, and they're like, is any of this going to be useful in life? Why don't you teach us something that's going to be useful for real life? And the teacher goes, okay, today I'm going to teach you how to do your taxes while dealing with the death of a loved one. And so she's like, fill out these forms, get all the information 100% correct while I deal with the beloved class hamster. And she's got the hamster holding a knife to it. And all the kids have their pencils and they're crying.
But you point out something interesting, which is that sometimes it feels like our main metric for whether or not we're doing the thing that's meaningful, or we're doing the right thing, or we're doing something that's fulfilling, is how happy we are. Because you can be at a job but not feeling fulfilled at all, and it'll make you feel really depressed. And you feel like you're just working to get by. There seems to be more to life than being happy as well, though, right? Because I remember, if you go back to episode 14, we're sitting down with Father AP, and I'm asking him about absurdism and Albert Camus' mythological bend, where he goes, you have to imagine that Sisyphus, the guy who's doomed in Tartarus to keep rolling the rock up, is happy to be doing that, to be doing something that appears meaningless. Because in Camus' version of nihilism, called absurdism, life was inherently meaningless unless you chose to enjoy and take pleasure in things, and kind of realizing the joke of it. AP responded with, who cares if you're happy? Which sounds bleak, but if you think about it this way, in order to get to big meaning, you have to know things that are true. And truth, it doesn't depend on you being happy. If anything, a lot of the time being happy can actually throw you off of truth.
One thing that's interesting on that, I love a quote from Miyamoto Musashi, that's, the truth is what it is. And you can either bend to its will or live a lie. And nobody wants to live a lie.
Nobody wants to. Well, you get stuck in hedonic treadmills of, well, this is giving me a little bit of pleasure.
Yeah, it's like convincing yourself of something in the moment and just kind of ignoring it.
I work a dead-end job to just barely get enough money to get by, and I use all of my excess money to buy potato chips.
To ignore that fact.
To ignore that, to blind myself with pleasures.
What's the one song that's like I do coke so I can work harder, so I can earn more money, so I can do more coke. It's like it becomes an endless cycle of ignoring your life.
It's a hedonic treadmill.
Yeah.
In some sense. I'm working
I love that
to
term,
get more
hedonic
pleasure.
treadmill.
Yeah, I'm working to get pleasure. And I'm working, and the work is making me miserable. And my only escape from the misery is the pleasure. It's just to keep going in this cycle. People feel trapped. The hard part is...
So what's our alternative to this? Because we've just laid out this issue that people commonly face.
Yeah. So, to go, hey, if the pleasure isn't serving any higher purpose, and this is interesting because here's a metric for serving the purpose. Is your pleasure taking pleasure in the pleasure of others? Is your happiness in the happiness of others? Because if it's just your happiness, then perhaps it's hedonic in that sense, right? If I'm enjoying something, I'm getting pleasure out of it, I'm getting pleasure of playing video games alone, then that's not helping.
This is an interesting point you bring up, actually, because I see what you mean and I agree, but I also disagree.
Interesting.
Because you asked a question recently that was, do you have to give yourself permission to be happy?
Yeah.
And I really thought about that because I've been realizing in my life just how much of a people pleaser I am, to the point that I am deeply unhappy and will even get pissed off if I can't please people, if they're not happy, if I can't make them happy, or if they'll just stay sad or mad or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so I've actually been trying to detach myself from that like core need to make people happy and to ease their suffering so that I can be happy, because it's essentially attaching myself to their grief or anger or whatever, and it's bringing me down pointlessly. It's like there's no meaning in that. I'm just arbitrarily changing my emotional state based on other people's emotional states. And so that's where I think one part of being happy on your own without needing to please other people is important. I think the caveat where you are right is in like essentially what we're saying, that verse from the Bible, a joyous giver.
Right.
Somebody who's actually happy to help other people. It's like, it's not happy because other people are happy because I helped them, and that's why I'm helping them, so that they're happy, so that I can be happy. It's I'm happy to help, regardless of whether or not the other person is happy about receiving the help. Obviously, you don't want to be helping, and it's actually a bad thing that you're doing and making their life miserable. But it's like in an actual generous way of like giving to charity or offering your time to help somebody with their excess load of work. It's like those are good things. And if you happily do those and the person happens to become happy, then that's great.
It's interesting because the thing you're talking about is crossing a couple of wires, and in logotherapy.
Okay.
Because we talked about how the second branch of logotherapy, the second area you can find meaning, is in experience and encounter, right? So you connect making other people happy with that. Now, there's also the third thing, suffering. If you think about giving, it also means that you're losing something. And losing something is perhaps attached to suffering, right? But are you are you suffering for something meaningful? So are you suffering in a way that is actually benefiting something or somebody? Or are you suffering in a way that's getting towards a goal? Are you suffering in a way that is making something better? Or are you persevering through your difficulty because of something? If you are giving something to somebody that is kind of frivolous in some way, maybe that doesn't really, I mean, if you think about your people pleasing, right? Are you striving to do it in a way that is like useful? When you are suffering to please people?
Yeah, I think a good example from my life actually was at this for the specific work I was doing at the time, there was a whole lot of material to get through that I had to sort and organize and then send off to various people. And we were getting essentially comments about our work, about people being unhappy with this and unhappy with that, and they wanted this and they wanted that. Yeah. But what they were unhappy about and what they wanted conflicted. And so it was physically impossible for me to make everybody happy. Yeah. And I found myself absolutely enraged at like these people and the work they'd given me, and why would you do this way, and why are you being like this, and all this stuff, when I could have just been, this is the work I can do, this is how I can get it done, and this is how I can get it out to them and that's the most efficient way I can do it given the workload and time I have.
It's interesting
because I knew those facts, but despite knowing those facts and doing that, I was still so enraged. And I found, after thinking about it, that the reason I was so mad was because I couldn't make everybody happy.
It's interesting because I think about, like, in a workplace, there's going to be a bit of suffering going on.
Yeah.
If you're a boss, you want your team to work hard. Essentially, you need them to suffer for objective number one, which is get meaning out of doing a thing, getting the great work done, right? I want the people to have that I'm working with to have an understanding that, yeah, we're going to work hard and we're going to suffer, but it's going towards something good.
Yes.
So even though you might be feeling that you're working hard, you might feel like you're really crunching, you're grinding, you're stressed out, but it's going somewhere useful. Suffering for the purpose of your work makes the suffering meaningful. If you feel like you're getting tied up in little things that don't matter, and your suffering feels like it's becoming pointless, then maybe that's worth examining and being like, this is why this is making me feel upset.
Yeah.
You're getting enraged because you feel like the work that you're doing, the thing you're contributing to, is being, marred by people's smaller expectations. They're unhappy with things that don't seem to make sense. If I work really hard at putting together a piece of copy and my boss looks at it and she's like, I don't like the way that sounds, I have to think about, what is my goal? Is the goal to craft a good piece of copy, or is it to craft a piece that sounds good to my boss?
The fun part is you got to do both.
Yeah. Well, you also sometimes have to sit back and go like, okay, the person being happy is important because my boss knows better than me about this project and knows what's going to cohere better most of the time. But you got to think about, like, is the same way. It's like, are you pleasing people in a way that's meaningful, or are you pleasing people in a way that doesn't matter? That is kind of like frivolous.
Yeah.
Now, if you think about, take this people pleasing, apply it to kids. Everything that you do to make kids happy feels frivolous.
I think this one is where it's interesting because it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
Because kids change instantly.
Yes.
I've seen kids that are like screaming and crying, and then somebody like looks away and suddenly they're fine. They're like, oh, nobody's paying attention to me? Oh, okay, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
Or it's like, I remember I was running around with one kid looking after him, and he wanted to go that way further into the forest that also led to a highway. And I said, no, we're going this way. And I just turned around and walked towards where I wanted to go. And it's like, initially it was like, no, I want to go this way. And then he just ran after me. And within 5 seconds, he was the happiest kid in the world.
Yeah.
He'd completely forgotten that direction existed.
Yeah. Well, it's like, oh, I wanted the pink one.
Yeah.
But why is the happiness of the kid important in that minute? It's like, well, if you're emotionally attached to the kid, them happy is making you happy. So if they're not happy, when they're not happy, they're going to make you miserable a lot of the time.
I think kids are a bit of a different...
It's a different dynamic.
It's a different dynamic
because pleasing your boss.
Because your boss is a grown human.
Supposedly.
I assume you don't have a boss baby.
I don't. No.
Yeah. Me neither.
Yeah.
My boss is a grown man.
I can't speak for all bosses.
I'm sure there's a boss baby out there. Give us a good review.
I hope it's Alec Baldwin as a baby. Cookies are for closers. That was part. Did you ever see that DreamWorks movie?
No, is that an actual line?
Yeah, that's the actual line. Well, it's a play on Alec Baldwin in another movie going, coffee is for closers.
That's amazing.
Put that coffee down.
Alec Baldwin.
Awesome. Shoot.
What are we talking about?
We are talking about suffering meaningfully.
Yeah.
And noticing that your giving might not be joyous if you find out that your giving is not going to the right place.
Yeah, that's a huge one. Like,
Right?
I'm fine with paying taxes when they're going towards healthcare and whatever other things. But as soon as it's going to, like,
War.
some corrupt politician, it's like, oh, now Mr. Man has a new hot tub.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I want a new hot tub. Give me my money back.
Yeah. It's kind of that feeling of, hey, don't give your money to the homeless person because he's going to use it for drugs. It's like, well, that statement is designed to not make you feel good about giving the money.
It's like, I'll buy a sandwich for a homeless guy.
I'll buy you the drugs.
I know where to get them solidly sourced.
I'll perpetuate your destructive hedonic treadmill.
You should advertise that on the east side.
This episode is brought to you by heroin.
Oh my
I'm
gosh.
sorry. That's not.
I'm not. No.
That's not the message that we want to spread here. A little bit of what we've been talking about so far has kind of mimicked something that I once learned about in philosophy courses. One of the first courses I took was metaphysics.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
it was taught by Dr. Rana Ahmad, and she did a great job of kind of breaking down why it's called metaphysics, which the word meta kind of means above, the layer above. And the reason why they call it that is because it was the first kind of artifact of metaphysics, was they were examining Aristotle's bookshelves.
Interesting.
And he had a book that didn't make sense about anything, and it was literally placed above the physics books.
That's so good.
Above physics. I don't know if that's really true, but it is the story.
like it. That's awesome.
And then she broke down, you have to know what things are. You've got to figure out what the model of reality is in order to figure out what your epistemology is. And you have to know what your epistemology is if you're going to be able to do something like ethics. And her specialty was in medicine ethics.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
In deciding what's the most ethical approach here in the hospital, for instance. And it's interesting because one of the things that we talked about when considering the question and the answer, what's the model of reality? Earlier on, you mentioned the afterlife.
Yeah.
Right? The idea of there being an afterlife is implying something about your model of reality in that this isn't it. There's something above this. There's more than what we're encountering.
Because that's a pretty common line. There has to be more to life than this.
Yeah.
There has to be something else.
I say it all the time. There's got to be more than life than this. And it's a very important question.
But then I drink an espresso and I'm like, I don't think so. I think this is it.
Coffee turns you into an atheist right away.
I'm an atheist in the cafe.
Atheist in the cafe. Theist in the sheets. No. It's the idea that, in physics, we understand that there's more dimensions than the ones that we're perceiving immediately. We're in 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time, but there's a lot more that we don't know. Supposedly, there's like 20 dimensions, apparently. I can't begin to name them for you, but the idea of there being an afterlife is an implication that there's more than what we're experiencing right now. And it puts into like, okay, if there's more, what is that thing that we're assuming is higher up? What use is it having for this? And at least the Hitchhiker's Guide would imply this is the machine that they're using to figure out what the meaning is.
Yeah.
Just like we use smaller simulations to learn meaningful things here. And simulation theory is another thing that kind of floats around in this aspect. Is the afterlife is actually the real life, and this is the simulation.
Yes, yeah. I love I can't remember David Solomon, who wrote...
Yeah, who wrote...
something about
the
a
Dead
Zen
Saints
Afterlife.
Chronicles.
Yeah, the Dead Saints Chronicles. He called it Earth University.
Yeah, his whole thing was that he built up he was one of the founders. He built up the near-death experience reference forum, and people commonly report in their near-death experience is this feeling of, oh, we're actually beings of light and all this, and what we're looking through is a summation of our lives when we die, and being like, okay, how was the character that you played in this game? What were their stats? How many hours did they spend sleeping and all that? What did they accomplish, right? So we're playing this game, we're living these lives, and we're even sometimes reincarnating according to his model of reality, because this is Earth University. We're actually we're the students, up there is the college campus, and we're coming down here each life you live as a class.
Yeah.
In some sort. And I like that idea. It's like we're coming down here to work in the system and crunch out what the meaning of life is. And because up there, we don't even know. But yeah, like, what is your model of reality? You have to figure out what it is and why it's meaningful.
So could you define model of reality? Like, what does that mean exactly?
Well, theology is a great example of this, right? In the sense that the model of reality is that there is a God who came from nothing, and he created the world. And in some models, for instance, of theology, the world is God's way of self-actualizing. God comes down in many forms in this world and embodies many forms. And, if you're a Christian, you might believe that one of those many forms was Jesus Christ, to literally come down and be a person, right? In other ways of looking at it, a Hindu way is to say that the Atman said I, because it wanted to experience ego. So it became all of us in all of our various incarnations, because we're still parts of the Atman, still doing the experience of ego, right? So your model is going to change, and based on your model, you decide what is important to you.
Is that the Hindu belief where enlightenment is realizing that you're part of this God, or is that Buddhism?
Well, yeah, actually, that's pretty much around the same area, is that Buddhism is one of these enlightened schools.
Yeah.
From Hinduism, which kind of...
Oh, Buddhism came from Hinduism?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, the word Buddha means to awaken, is to be awake. So a Buddha is an awakened one who's woken up to the purpose of this, right? The enlightenment is being fully realized in who you are and what you're doing. So your model of reality is going to change a little bit about the way that you interface with the world. In Hinduism, for instance, the idea that you're going to keep reincarnating and that you're going to keep being in this wheel and everything is going to go on like this forever. In India, part of their culture a lot of the time is taking their time with things because they're not in a rush.
You're not going anywhere.
We're doing this life and then we're going to do the next one.
Yeah.
What's the big deal? Be a little bit late for work. I love that guy on Instagram who kind of pretends to be a guru. He's like, who cares? Just chill. It's like,
there's something about Indian accents that makes everything infinitely more wise.
Maybe it just that's kind of like the implication. There's a lot of spirituality in India.
Yeah.
And a lot of that kind of feeling of like, well, there's something greater than
I was talking to a friend about this recently. What blows my mind when I learned about this guy, Sadhguru.
I love Sadhguru.
He's famous in India. And I'm like, that would never happen in North America. A guy being famous because he's wise.
They're always cult leaders, or we don't respect them, or there's something off about them, or they're always like trying to steal from us.
Yeah, I just remember watching a video with him. It was him on the front of the stage, and then there was a bunch of high school students, I think. Maybe it was like early university or something.
Yeah.
Either way, it was like early 20s to mid-teens, like young adults and kids. And they were asking him questions, and one guy talked about how his goal was to move to Canada and get... I think he specifically used the word Canadian dollars. And Sadhguru was like, don't worry about the Canadian dollars and getting all of those. Something else. It was so freaking funny.
Well, Sadhguru is the one who goes, I think he's the one who's famous for democracy as a system.
No, that's not Sadhguru. That's someone else.
No,
yeah.
that's someone else? Okay.
I love that. That's so freaking funny.
I've been debunked. But like I'm saying, your epistemology is going to come from there, and then the individual ethics, the dynamics of this exact situation and what's the best way to interact with it, the most right way to do it. It's going to start with, we back to the model of reality. And that's in the macro sense of how does the universe work, and it's also in the micro sense.
So if I could summarize it, model of reality is essentially the way you believe and understand the universe as a whole like its foundation and how it operates.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's like, as a Christian, I believe it's like God created everything and he's there and he's everywhere and whatnot. But an atheist is like, there was the Big Bang and we just happened and a bunch of random mutations and whatnot. And then evolution and we came here.
Well, I love physics. And I think there is something to figuring out the individual, like the physical interaction of particles in space is also, to me, I think that's part of answering the 42 question. Because we have to figure out how the universe physically works and why. And there's actually a lot of bits and pieces in there that we don't understand, and it links and it points towards something that is beyond this, right? When we think about the way that quantum particles work, or the way that something like quantum entanglement might work, in the sense that, okay, this particle somehow changes and reacts in its form based on what some other particle that it's quantum entanglement to is, but we don't actually know where that other particle is, and it could be somewhere else eons away from here in space. Eons actually is the term for time. Light years. It's light centuries away.
Yeah.
Light eons. But yeah, you're correct in the sense that, like, yeah, your model of reality is what you think how the universe works. But not even in the same way that I'm talking about there's a meaning to life and universe and everything on the macro scale, the meaning to your life, and what is your model of reality? What's the model that you're in right now in your life? Because this dynamic that you're in, this dichotomy of I go to work, I go home, I take care of this stuff. This is a model that you're living in.
Yeah.
You kind of self-constructed.
So we've got all these big esoteric ideas and thoughts. How does that come down to the everyday thing? Because I was watching, I think Naval Ravikant, I think his name is, and he was saying everybody wants 3 things, one of the things he said is like, in a serious emergency situation, you want to be the coolest cucumber in the room who still comes up with the correct solution. And I love that idea.
It's a bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
But it's hard to get to.
So that's essentially, because when you think of an enlightened Buddha or a guru, you think of a guy who's always cool and level and calm in every situation.
Because they're very certain in what their model of reality is.
Exactly. And they've got that, I don't know, maybe they've got the meaning, what it is. But it's like all of this comes down to how do you live the everyday life?
Yeah.
How do you do each individual thing?
Yeah. That's
because one thing we can do with getting all esoteric and mystical is getting lost in that.
Yes.
And forgetting to do the basic thing of make your bed.
Yep. Well, like I was saying, as much as we're in a macro model of reality, you have a lot of individual control over your micro model of reality. Your home, your job, the people that you're around, the people that you care for, and what you choose to do with your life is your micro model. Does it serve the meaning of your life? Now, you have to get around to figuring out, okay, what is the model of my life? What is the meaning of it? Where am I deriving meaning from? And now that if you start to pinpoint where that is, you then start to pinpoint, what am I doing in these individual actions? The way that I wake up in the morning and handle it, is it the best way for me to serve that meaningful life? Because it might not be, right? If the meaning of my life if I'm very extroverted and I enjoy the company of others and I take a lot of pride in being good friends with a lot of people, so I'm going out late at night, so maybe I'll sleep in a little bit earlier in the morning. It's like not a bad thing for my specific model. But if I'm someone who my sense of fulfillment comes from doing my work, principally, then I'm going to have to put in as much dedication as I can to showing up early, and I might wake up early. So that model, figuring out where my sense of fulfillment is, helped me make that micro decision, right? Like I said, you start with metaphysics, your model of the world, get down to epistemology, what you value and why, then you get down to ethics, the individual situations, the individual dynamics, and how you work it out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's basically that. When you figure out what
we did it.
When you figure out what your Ikigai is, it's easy for you to go, this serves my Ikigai, this doesn't. It doesn't mean that if my Ikigai is to have the best possible physical body, then I might not get a lot of fulfillment or even a lot of happiness out of eating ice cream. Even though to a lot of people love ice cream.
Yeah.
I like ice cream. It's very pleasurable. Is it meaningful? Not really. And this is interesting. One of the ideas that, like a lot of young men, I also very much like Jordan Peterson's idea of doing what is meaningful versus doing what is expedient. Things that are expedient appear important right now.
Oh, okay.
Things that are meaningful will appear meaningful later.
Yeah.
And it's interesting if you apply that to suffering. Suffering never appears meaningful right now.
Interesting.
This
That's
push-up
really
hurts. What the most expedient thing for me to do is to stop doing the push-ups. The most meaningful thing for me to do is to keep doing the push-ups because the push-ups will make me healthier, and being healthier will help me do other things better. That's meaningful. It's expedient often to eat food, to eat whatever's in front of you, because gaining calories, getting like nutrients immediately, it's very expedient. Getting the little bump from sustaining yourself a little bit further. But is it necessarily meaningful to you? Are you doing it in a meaningful way? Are you eating for your health, or are you eating for your momentary dopamine bump of getting the Big Mac, you know? I joke around about food a lot. It's not meant to put anybody on the spot, but is it meaningful? Some people's meaning in life is to cook.
Like Gordon Ramsay. What a classic answer.
His
What
meaning,
about who's a different one? Oliver something?
I don't know. He's the one that always people always make fun. His kids would be like, "Oh yeah, Oliver's a better chef than you," or something like that. But if you look at someone like Gordon Ramsay, his meaning in life is to get the most out of food and its presentation and its service to other people. Yeah. Cooking for yourself might not be as fulfilling. Not as fulfilling. But if you sit down in his restaurant and you go, "This is an incredible meal," you've served his meaning a little bit.
Yeah.
You've served Gordon Ramsay's Ikigai every time you go to his restaurant. So sit down and think, where are the areas in my life that I'm A, getting meaning out of working, B, getting meaning out of my experiences or the people I'm with, and where are the areas that I'm suffering in life, and is that suffering contributing to the things that I think are meaningful?
Or is it needless?
If it's needless, then you start to seek what is the way for me to eliminate this. You know?
Or at least you should.
Yeah. And by figuring out how to do you as best as possible, you contribute into the macrocosm of the world. People who are doing their best to be themselves, or doing their best to do their part of the equation that will maybe one day get us to the ultimate answer of life, the universe, and everything. 42.
Boom.
Did we do it?
We did it.
Is that it?
We did it.
How long do we go? Looks like we're actually we got a few minutes left. Do you got any final thoughts? It's done. We can
Nothing that you would want me to say on this podcast because it's religious.
Well, you know, like it is a religious question, but it's also a physics question. It's also a philosophical question. It's also a mathematical question.
Yeah.
It's a question that takes
mathematical.
I once referenced earlier to you that Douglas Adams passed away while he was working on his last book, which started out as another Dirk Gently book, and it was slowly turning into the 6th Hitchhiker's Guidebook. What happened is that Owen Colfer, a guy who took a lot of inspiration from his style, ended up getting the deal to write the 6th Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy book, which was jokingly titled "And Another Thing." The main character, Arthur, from the Hitchhiker's Guide series, is having a conversation with a ship's AI computer. And about, well, we figure out that the meaning was 42, but then the Earth that was designed to, calculate the problem got blown up, so what do we do now? And then the ship was kind of reflecting, being, well, 42 might mean something different to me than it does to you. In fact, 42 is the exact amount of cycles that the reactor for this ship has that will essentially sustain me before it goes out and I die. So it's like, there is a big 42 somewhere out there, but there's also your little 42, and you got to figure out what that is for yourself. Pretty much it.
Boom.
There's also another bit, and maybe this is what we'll end up on. One of the mice, eventually coming back into the regular form, decides that I'm just going to take this human's brain and we'll study that. And not knowing exactly what the meaning is, but having this thing will actually allow me to write a lot of books and do a bunch of TV show deals and go on talk shows and talk about what the meaning is without actually knowing the answer for it. And at the end of the day, yes, there is moral scruples and, the drive to actually find the real meaning and the justice of it all. But if it comes down to a choice between that and just taking the money and running, I, for one, could do with the exercise. You can find us at The Forest Creek on Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, all the other fun places, youtube.com/@therealforestcreek. Drop by our website and check out our services, theforestcreekweb.com, and send us an email at theforestcreek@gmail.com. We'd love to hear back from you about the stuff that you'd be interested in seeing, and we're always up to something new. Case in point, more of these podcasts. Case in point, check out what we're doing with our current client at St. George of YVR and see if you can contribute to help them in their cause.
Joyously.
Don't do it if it makes you upset. It's okay. I don't want you to do it.
Or maybe do. They need the money.
I need it more. Give it to me. Well, that's us here at the Forest Creek Podcast. Any last words here, Jared?
I'm Jared.
Thoughts? I'm Raph.
See ya, suckers.
So long, and thanks for all the fish.